Good evening, everyone. This virtual provincial presentation is being held on the unceded territories of the Assembly of First Nations of Quebec. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Rosemary Murphy, who is the president of the Quebec Federation of Home and School Associations. Rosemary?
Thank you, Brian. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of our Federation, LEARN's Community Learning Center Initiative, and the Committee for the Enhancement of the Curriculum of the History of Quebec, I welcome you to the celebration of Black History. I would like to acknowledge that this event is taking place with funding from the Community Support, Multiculturalism, and Anti-Racism Initiative of the Patrimoine Canadian Heritage. Jeanette? I lost my my co-conspirator here.
Yeah, I think we need to
Okay, Jeanette, unmute.
It's not that easy. Okay.
Okay, go ahead, dear.
I can't find the text now. Okay. Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. Je m'appelle Ginette Sauvé-Franquel et je suis la vice-présidente exécutive de la Fédération québécoise des associations foyers-écoles. Au nom de la Fédération, de l'Initiative des centres scolaires communautaires de l'EARN et du Comité pour l'amélioration du curriculum d'histoire de Québec, je vous souhaite la bienvenue à cette célébration du mois de l'histoire des Noirs. J'aimerais reconnaître l'apport financier du programme de soutien aux communautés, au multiculturalisme et à la lutte contre le racisme du ministère du Patrimoine canadien pour cet événement.
Thank you, Jeanette. We have quite a few people here tonight, and I would like to just to recognize a few, please. We have Mr. Tino Bordenaro and Mrs. Lynn Travers, the chairman and secretary of ABI, the Advisory Board of English Education. Welcome. We also have I can see the attaché for the MP, Sophie Chattel, who's the MP from Pontiac. And we have a number of commissioners, and we have a lot of our people representing our sister associations throughout Quebec. As you know, tonight we were supposed to take place at the Pierrefonds Community High Schools, the Learning Center from the Lester B. Pearson School Board. Unfortunately, the pandemic has kept our schools closed to the public, but I'd like to thank Mrs. Judy Kelly, who's the chairman of Lester B., Dr. Cindy Finn, the Director General of Lester B. Pearson, for their attendance tonight. Thank you so much for your support whenever we ask for your help. I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, please now allow me to introduce our special guest. She was the first Black woman elected to Parliament representing NDG and Lachine. She is currently now the president of the QCGN, the Community Learning Groups Network. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Marlene Jennings.
Thank you, Rose. And thank you so much for inviting me to be with you this evening and to speak with you. And I'd like to do a shout out to Jeff Kelly. Long time, we had an opportunity back in the 90s of collaborating together, and I have a great deal of an enormous respect for you. And your son's coming along pretty well too. Same to you, Judy, for your election, I believe, as president of Lester B. Pearson School Board, if I'm not mistaken. Great. I'm going to give you a quote, start off on a quote, because this is all about Black History Month and the contribution of Blacks to Canada. The members and officials of the Negro Citizenship Association and the Toronto CPR, Canadian Pacific Railways, division of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters will continue to fight unremittingly for the right of all peoples of this planet to enter Canada and become its citizens without penalty or reward because of their race, color, religion, national origin, or ancestry. Yes, we take the uncompromising position that what appears to be the premeditated discrimination in Canada's immigration laws and policy is utterly inconsistent with democratic principles and Christian ethics. Now, as a former member of Parliament, and as someone who was educated all my life here in Quebec, I find it astounding that probably nobody on this call, including educators, would know who made that statement and where and when. I'm astounded that I didn't know. Let me tell you, it was Stanley G. Grizzle, president of the CPR, Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. He made that statement. I'm sorry for the noise, my daughter's cooking our supper. He made that statement on April 27, 1954, in Ottawa, before ministers and parliamentarians. In the spring of 1954, the sleeping car porters, active sleeping car porters, retired porters, and their allies, who were mainly members of the Jewish community, chartered sleeping cars to travel to Ottawa to meet with Canadian government ministers and parliamentarians to advocate and to protest that Canada should be based on inclusiveness and diversity. And they continued their advocacy for inclusiveness and equality. And a result of their decades-long struggle was that in the early 1960s, the Canadian government finally adopted Canadian Immigration Act, which was universal, which no longer put barriers up to immigration of Black British subjects into Canada. Immigration from our Asian countries and from other countries. It also resulted in the late 1960s, early 1970s with Canada's Fair Employment Act, which ensured all federally regulated businesses and federal institutions would not be able to discriminate based on race, color of skin, etc. That part of our history, we should know that, not just me as a Black woman, but all Canadians and all Quebecers should know that. Because if today we celebrate a multicultural society, it's in large part by the advocacy and the unwavering commitment to a multicultural Canada and to a Canada which was diverse and cherished diversity and inclusiveness, and also cherished fair employment practices. So why am I telling you this? I'm talking to you about this because what I learned about fairness in employment and diversity, I learned from my father and my mother. My father was African American, born in Birmingham, Alabama. He came to Canada in the 1940s. He was recruited by the Canadian Pacific Railway. They used to go down to the southern states and recruit Black men to work on the passenger sleeping cars and the passenger cars of the railways here in Canada. Because at that time, the overwhelming majority of Canadians traveled, if they had any distance, traveled by railway. The airlines were not accessible to the ordinary Canadian. So I learned because he became active in his union. He became the secretary treasurer of the Montreal division of the CPR sleeping car porters. And my mother, who was Franco-Manitoban, she was a firecracker when it came to equality of the genders. She raised the 8 children, my siblings and I, that housework was not women's work. Housework was everybody's work. So every Saturday we had rotating chores, and my brothers had to clean the toilets, scrub the floors, polish the floors, dust, you name it, as did all of the girls. And outside, my brothers mowed lawns and shoveled the driveway and sidewalks, as did the girls. So there was no such thing as men's work or women's work. It was everybody's work. I want to talk about what's happening right now with our education system. I think that our English education system in Quebec has a lot of lessons to give to the provincial government, because we welcome and we're built on diversity. Maybe it wasn't something that the school boards back in the 50s, 60s, 70s aimed at, but because of the religious school boards, that's what happened. Our schools became the receiving place for immigrants who were not Roman Catholics, who were not, even if they were French speaking, if they were not Roman Catholics, they weren't allowed into the French schools. I'm an example of that. And so are my brothers and sisters. So we not only lead on diversity, we also lead on teaching the diverse history of Quebec, of Canada. And therefore, if I didn't know this history from my school, that we're talking about the 1950s and the early 60s. Today, when I get invited into schools, elementary or high schools, particularly the English elementary and high schools, I love the fact that not only are the students diverse, the teaching staff is diverse, the support staff is diverse. And on the curricula, we have, not just during Black History Month, but during regular history classes, for instance, we talk about the contributions of Black Quebecers and Black Canadians. When you're taking science classes, whether it's biology or chemistry, there will be discussion about who invented that. And there will be a point made to talk about the diverse inventors and leaders in those fields. When you take English literature, the same thing. It's not just going to be the standard homogenic white writers and poets. It's going to be a diverse class that's going to be offered. So I actually think that we are leaps and bounds in education and the contributions of all of the diversity of our society as compared to our Francophone counterparts. And that's not to take away from Francophone counterparts, but largely until very recently, all of the curricula was based on white Francophone Quebecers and France. That's it, that's all. Even Martinique, Guadeloupe, Haiti, former French colony, first Black independent country was not part of the curricula. And their contributions were not part of the curricula. It's only in the last 10 or 15 years that it's starting to accept and actually welcome diversity in the actual pedagogical teaching materials, which is why when I learned that Dr. Dorothy Williams, along with Linton Garner, had developed their educational toolkit, and that it's available in French as well. I was delighted about that. And I'm going to wind this up now by saying that thank you to the Quebec Home and School Federation, or the Quebec Federation of Home and Schools, to Brian Rock, to Carol, to Rose, and to everyone else who worked to put this evening on, because I think it's important and I'm delighted to be part of it. And with that, I'm going to end. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene, for a very inspirational little talk with us. Thank you. You brought up some interesting facts that I didn't know about either. And I'm a historian, so this is great. Thank you, Marlene. I think I saw David Birnbaum. Did he come in? I thought I saw his name.
Yes.
He did?
Yeah.
Okay, because we wanted to thank him very much for his support. David is the M&A for Darcy McGee, and he has been an amazing support for the ABC kit for Linton and Dorothy. So I thank you very much. I don't see him anywhere, unfortunately, but I know he's here somewhere. Thank you, David.
Rosemary, if I just might say.
Go ahead.
It's just not enough to thank him. David made sure that we had funds to be able to translate the whole kit. And without that, we would not have been able to make sure that we could go into French schools as well as the English schools in the province and across the country. And right now we are receiving lots of requests from across the country for the kit in French outside of Quebec. So wonderful. And thank you, David. We can't thank you enough for having provided that opportunity for us.
Thank you, Linton, for that. Okay, so now I'm going to ask Rob to break us into our breakout sessions. Rob, do you want to handle that?
I am here. I'm going to push it for you.
Okay, thank you.
David's in the waiting room now.
Oh, okay. Okay. If I understand correctly, Rob, anyone that has asked to be part of Dorothy's will stay on, and those that have asked to be part of Linton's, you'll put them in a breakout room?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so, okay. Okay, so whenever you want them to start, let us know.
Got Dorothy up. Now we just need Dorothy.
What'd you say, Carol?
We just need you.
Oh, so you're ready? Because I'm
We're
seeing
ready.
a breakout rooms list in front of me, so I just assumed it was still going on.
No, it's done now. We're ready
Okay,
to listen to you.
all right. So the screen has been shared with me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because I was told that it was, okay, so here we go. There we go. All right, I'm just going to move this over. Great, I think I'm good. Well, good evening, everybody. So Tonight, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the precepts behind the kit, the ABCs of Canadian Black History Kit. And one of the basic precepts behind it is this concept of Sankofa. Sankofa is a proverb of the Akan people of West Africa, and it literally means it is not taboo to go back and fetch what you forgot. And it really means go back and fetch it. This is what the history is all about for me. It teaches that people must go back to their roots. Oops, my screen, there we go. That people must go back to their roots to move forward, and that whatever they have lost, forgotten, or abandoned, or been stripped of can be reclaimed, revived, preserved, and perpetuated. Canada's Black history needs a Sankofa mindset. Sankofa recognizes knowledge or the stories of the past, and that they can give meaning to the present. So this model tells us to learn from the past and bring those lessons into our lives. And we also know from the way the model is used in Africa that the past has transformative value for us today, such as what Marlene just shared with us, a story of a speech that was made decades ago that was so significant. You hear it today and you go, wow. And some of us are like really moved by it. It changes the way we think about history. It changes the way we think about how our past has unfurled. So the past can be transformative. And the precepts of Sankofa reinforce that identity and respect of self and others, a love for learning and an understanding of one's society. And most of us would agree that these values are congruent with the goals of modern education. However, as Blacks within Canada, we must consistently press hard to find Black knowledge explicit in the education of our children. In the absence of explicit knowledge in societal institutions, how do we perpetuate the values of Sankofa in 2022? Or to put it another way, some may even ask, why teach Black history? What is it good for in this Black Matters era? It's precisely because of this moment that more than ever, we need to understand how Sankofa can equip our youth. The pandemic has exacerbated this urgency. Indeed, their education and their lives have been upended. Schools and parents need to help to redress some of the deleterious effects of the pandemic isolation and the widening, I'm sorry, because my screen keeps changing. The pandemic isolation and the widening gaps over our youth are starting to see in their own development and learning. And I'm sure some of you teachers have seen that in the class. Some of those students are behind by a good year or so. So we need targeted tools to build self-esteem and self-awareness and pride of self. That is critical. And years ago, I set out to meet those objectives. When I went into the schools, I found Black History Month was celebrated with images of Nelson Mandela, Michael Jordan, or Oprah. And they were like, they would put these pictures up on the school classroom walls. And the first few years, I would ask the teachers in hushed tones, like, where are the Canadian role models? And they would look at me blankly. They had no clue about the role and contributions of Blacks. And Blacks, Natives, and other minorities have been systematically ignored. And we've all been left with a distorted picture of our Canadian history. And so teachers' moments of hesitation, embarrassment, or blank looks simply crystallized my resolve and my focus. As an educator and a public speaker, I recognized the lack of resources for committed teachers. They had no idea how to access this information, what was credible. And so this gave birth to the ABCs of Canadian Black History Kit. In a world filled with obfuscation, cultural bias, and stereotype, how can teachers be comfortable about teaching about the Black experience? Many want to, but have no guide. They too, like their students, were miseducated. I went to the same school system as most of you did, and I didn't learn. I probably learned about 1% of what I have in my head today, because I've made it a point to learn about these stories. Not everybody has. So it really is understandable in my mind when I think of teachers, and that really, if you do want to teach Black history, you just often don't know where to start, at least from the Canadian perspective. So the ABCs of Canadian Black History Kit was created to empower teachers. I find sometimes that people are skeptical, and in fact, they don't really understand the need for inclusiveness. These are words that really have just become buzzwords within the last 4 to 5 years that are actually framing policy in a real concrete way. And so what I say is, look, as a child, I had to learn about the monarchy from the Celts all the way to the House of Windsor, et cetera. And the expectation in our education today was and always been about understanding European pasts. And this underlying precept is the reason we continue to teach history, despite the fact most of us hate it and feel that lessons learned by it have little bearing in our lives, in our own lives. You know, I disagree with that because, of course, I love history. The Sankofa mindset, which I referred to earlier, can resonate in much the same way as European precepts have over time. And it is important that, it's important that there's an increasing recognition that others have a voice and other stories need to be incorporated. There may be other lessons from other cultures transplanted here, or are actually Indigenous here that have not been shared. So the untold stories of Blacks in these silent, marginalized communities can open students to culture and diversity, broaden the definition of what it means to be Canadian, and prepare students for multi-ethnic experiences in higher education and in the global workplace. This is the Sankofa mindset. It is understanding that African truths, lessons, and values can be transposed to everyone. Radical pedagogy, well, maybe you might think it's so, but the ABCs of, Canadian Black History Kit, it is designed for educators to learn about and to integrate, not just learn, but to integrate and then teach their charges at the level that they're at. And so it's literacy-based education. So here are the basic components. There are 14 items in this kit. So the next slides I'm going to share with you are really to give you a sense of what the kit is about. So the alphabet-based manual introduces an accomplishment, a significant place, or an historical event of Blacks in Canada. Actually, what you see is a story of Rose Fortune from Nova Scotia. And we include exercises based on literacy competence. That's on the right-hand side of, when you open it up, you have two pages. And the left is the story, and the right are the exercises. And these include sections like reading comprehension, advanced questions, and a section for the older grades, or rather those that are far more literate competent, such as exploring context, the contrast and similarity, and having the students, your learners, comparing the experience of Blacks in this time and space with Blacks in another time and space. So that is what each lesson brings to the classroom, is a great story, a ditty or a poem that the students can integrate, background material, a whole host of new vocabulary that they can learn, and then these questions which interrogate their understanding of the stories. So in the teacher's guide, we also have a whole set of explanations. We have several lesson plans. We even have a glossary. And I must say the glossary for me is the most significant thing, or has become the most significant thing, because I've had a student who was working with me at McGill University who told me that in sharing this kit with his friends who are Québécois, when he said, "Je suis noir," they said, "Vous êtes raciste." And I realized at that point very clearly that sometimes we can use the same words, but they mean something different culturally and linguistically. And so what this glossary does, at least for those that start to use it, is it's going to allow for us from sea to sea, as schools across the country begin to use, we're going to have a vocabulary of racism, of discrimination, of race, of ethnicity, inclusion, Canadian values that, that affect the Black communities around us and people of color. This is, for me, quite new, quite revolutionary, because again, we don't talk in, we don't have the same language when we're talking about race in this country. We do when we're talking about language. Oh my goodness, we have a very, very refined and detailed understanding of bilingualism, Anglicism, and all kinds of words pertaining to linguistics. But when we start talking about race, people are like, oh, I don't want to go there. Oh, I'm nervous about offending, or I don't know how to say that without making people mad. So we do not talk about it, not in our daily lives. And we need to begin those conversations early in the school. So this is for me, one of the benefits of the glossary. We also have in this kit, a timeline. Everything that I've talked about has to do with arraying all of the 26 characters in the kit alphabetically from A to Z. Here is a way in which you can bring those stories out and celebrate the successes of Blacks, but chronologically. And it allows also the students to see how history developed or the Black presence developed in a particular time and space, because it includes references to the First World War, Second World War, Confederation, the Age of Exploration, etc. So all of these terminologies are part of what they get in class anyway. Who were the Blacks that were making a difference in these areas at this time? And that's what this poster will allow you to discuss. So the other thing the other elements in the kits that are incredibly popular are these cards. They're not trading cards, but they're cards that complement the text. In fact, the back of each one of these cards has the identical text that's in the book that we open up. And it includes also the ditties as well. And every single card has a different color, and every color responds to or corresponds to a particular theme. So you can put 3 or 4 cards together, and the students themselves can actually explore the characters and the events that were about politics or about sports, about let's see, pioneers, or about Black spaces in Canada that have been acknowledged either through Parks Canada or on a local level. So the cards are sort of a shortcut way in which to allow the students themselves to play with the concepts, the values that are portrayed in all the stories, and also to learn who these Black figures were and what the events were that were important. Finally, we provided a whole bunch of exercise materials over and above the cards and the posters. These are what we call supplemental materials, but they're, I won't say busy work, but you can make copies of it, and you can use these particular cards. They're sheets, they're sort of 8 by 12. Get them to fill them out, continue to reinforce their understanding of each individual character, what they did, where they lived, and what their expertise is. Not all Blacks were porters. They lived at different times in this country, and they had different jobs, different careers, different interests. And this, it kind of breaks that whole bias, that stereotype that we have of the Black man, whether it's, or the Black person, whether it was 10 years ago or 100 years ago, I suspect they probably think that there's been no change. There was no variety, but in fact, it was massive amount of variety. So that's what the cards also will help them to understand, and the supplemental materials. Kit helps to illuminate what was hidden before, and thus in the hands of the right educator, it can be empowering. Information contained in the kits will allow for inquiry into new areas that were unknown or denied. It may also give to disaffected learners a renewed sense of self and pride, because it shows Black contributions and heroes within Canadian history. And this knowledge can then be shared with others. For our very young Blacks, particularly those in, place like Montreal, the ABC's kits can answer the question, do I belong here? Which is, I guess, something that was brought out a bit by Marlene. Do I belong here? Yes, I believe knowing that you have a past here in Canada will be reinforced by using the kit. So I just want to thank you, and I wanted to share with you my understanding, sort of my foundational understanding of Sankofa, and how that fed into developing this kit and what this kit was about. So at this point, I'm going to stop here, and I'll take questions.
I don't know if Linton is finished. I thought we were going to do the questions. I don't know, Carol, are we doing the questions for both at the same time? Or did you want to do for Dorothy now?
Well, I have no way of knowing whether or not Linton is done.
You haven't gone into his breakout room.
I mean, usually we get a little notice, 5 more minutes, and then the breakout room ends. So I think we may as well take some questions now for Dorothy.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we get booted, when the others come back, then everybody can answer questions.
Okay, Dorothy, I had a comment by Grant Myers, who thanked you and said that the best conversations are uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Oops. Yes, you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
we can.
yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that, but some people won't even attempt it, right? And that, to me, is the reticence that I experienced when I was talking to educators before we even started pulling this together, Linton and I, in 2010. When the idea was just kind of like poo in our heads, that reticence to even begin the conversation, I think, is part of what pushed me or propelled me to consider putting this all together. Because I had the characters as part of my own archival research, and gosh, I have a basement full of materials. So I was very much aware of who these individuals were, what the events were, but what was I going to do with it? And it was that feeling like we've got to break that somehow or another. We've got to find a way to produce a kit or produce something that's going to break that reticence, because they're not, when you're teaching, before you teach, you're not even going to, there's no mandatory diversity classes that people take. Yeah. They walk into these classrooms with this incredible diversity in front of them and have had absolutely no guide about how to work with that and all of the attendant issues that may come up, and how to adapt what they have or integrate others. That other material, that hasn't been part of their training. So, after 10, 15 years in front of a classroom doing it one way, how do you break that? And that's really what this kit is about. I tell people when I'm thinking about it from sort of the big picture, when I sat down and I started writing the content for the kit, I tried to put in my mind how I would talk to a teacher in Northern Alberta in a one-room schoolhouse who's never met a Black person, but really and truly wants to teach, wants to integrate this material into their class. How do you do that without them feeling like, ooh, they're going to walk on a landmine, or they might say it the wrong way, or they might give the wrong impression. And so that's what this kit was about when we put it together, to make it turnkey. Open it up, use it, be comfortable with the material. There's enough material in there that you can wrap your head around the concepts and the ideas without feeling like you're going to offend. So anyway, a little bit of long answer, but I just wanted to let you know where that was coming from.
I have a question from Brian Rock.
Okay, Brian. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much, Dorothy, for being here this evening.
No.
I know you're famous for the 2 books that you have authored on the history of Blacks in Montreal. Can you sort of just let people know their titles and perhaps how they can obtain them?
Okay, well, my first book, I published in I didn't publish it, sorry. The Quebec Human Rights published it. Quebec Human Rights Commission published it in 1989, and it was titled Blacks in Montreal, 1628 to 1986, an urban demography. It was actually a demographic history, as you can tell from the title. And it was really looking at how the migration of groups of people, Black people coming into Montreal, particularly into Montreal. And the goal was really to try to trace their experiences in the housing market, which the commission was really interested in. And so I traced Barbadians and Jamaicans and West Indians of all sorts, Blacks coming from different parts of the country. What was their experience in the housing market? So that was my first book. The second book came out in 1997, simply because nobody responded to the first book. And I decided, it was not a history, but for all intents and purposes, it was the only book of its type. And it was time for me to write a true history of the Black community in Montreal. And so The Road to Now, A History of Blacks in Montreal, was my response to my first book. And that is actually a true, what I would call a history book that incorporated quite a bit of the first book in it, and then expanded to really give people a better understanding of Black community desires, needs, issues over the years, and how they fared. What are some of the issues historically? So it's a lot more comprehensive than the first one was. So those are my 2 books. The first book has been translated, the second book is not. So the first book is called Les Noirs Montréal, I think. So an essay urban demographie. Terrible French accent, I'm sorry, but that's what it is.
Okay, thank you. Sandra Stock, you had your hand up. I see you, Graham.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm having a bit of trouble with the connection. That's why I put my hand down, but I seem to be back now. First of all, I really want to congratulate Dorothy. As much as I've known about the ABC kit for a number of years, this is the first time I've really seen parts of it shown.
Oh.
It's really very creative. Who did the graphic part as an artist?
Yeah, you just want to stroke him. He's not in the room, but you want to stroke him.
Yeah, it's great. The look of it's terrific, and it would work well with elementary all the way up.
Yes.
There's things geared to all ages, and that must have been quite a difficult aspect to get going.
Yeah, well, actually, when it first started, Sandra, when we started off, I wrote the text I originally created was for a grade 4 teacher. The kit was not designed for children. The kit was designed for the teacher. And so I was writing for grade 4. And it was only because we had the focus groups and people were like looking at it and saying, oh my gosh, I could use this in CJEP. wow, there
Yeah.
are some classes in the university that could use this, like human studies or other courses could benefit from this information. So
Well,
it
well,
grew as a result of that.
also teacher training could benefit
Well,
from this very much.
well,
It
perhaps.
would be quite useful for adults getting education, because how things look, the visual part is just as important as oral, as speaking when you're teaching. I'm a retired teacher. And you have to keep them interested. Okay, I really think it's great.
Thank you.
And my connection isn't that good at the moment, so
No,
that's
you
it
sound
from
fine,
me.
Sandra. You're doing good. Lots of stroking. It's okay. I can hear it all.
Thank
You're
you.
doing good.
A question from Lorraine O'Donnell. Lorraine, are you still there?
Yeah, hi, I wrote the question, but I'll ask Dorothy. Thank you. Yeah, I echo Sandra's thoughts. It looks like a fabulous resource. Dorothy, I'm wondering if you've actually been in the room in classrooms when the kids are using it, and particularly Black kids, and if you could let us know what they make of it or what the teachers make of it when they're actually encountering your resource.
Well, two things happen. That's a very interesting question because two things happen. The teachers actually react differently than the children. I have actually been almost gobsmacked sometimes. Linton and I have shared this, where we've just been surprised by how adults react to the kit. And so that made me feel like, wow, you hit the spot, you really did meet your goal. They get really excited because it's so usable. It's sturdy, it is flexible. A really creative teacher will look at it and go, oh, I could do this with that. Oh, I can use it with this. And they can think of about 10 or 15 ways almost within the first 5 minutes of how you can use the kit. And I think the greatest compliment I've ever had, I've actually heard it more than once, is retired teachers who look at the kit and go, wow, I wish I'd had this when I was teaching. I can't believe how often I've heard that. And so again, that tells me that the other flip side is this is the best Black product I've seen, and it's Canadian. Every single story resonates with them because it's told from a Canadian perspective about the Blacks that created and had an impact in their community or nationally. And the stories go from BC all the way to Halifax. And it spans from 1628 all the way, I think our last story is mid-1980s. So there's enormous amount of material in many ways in which you can approach it. And so I think that the adults, the educators can see that immediately. The students tend to respond mostly because they get turned on by the cards. There's 26 cards, and there are 2 decks in the cards. There's 52 cards, and they start scrambling for them. They want to play, and then they get a card. They like a color. They're doing it immediately. They're responding to it based on their own interest immediately. Usually it's a color, and then if they can read it, they're like, "Oh wow, miss." And I caution the teachers to make sure they collect every single card, or they'll wind up before the end of the year not having a full deck.
Okay. Thank you, Lorraine. Graham?
Well, I want to say hello to Dorothy, whom I remember as a grade 4 student at Royal Arthur School.
Graham.
In what was still the Black Ghetto. It was, and in fact, I'm trying to remember his name, the guy who ran the Negro Community Center, who had been a railway reporter, and even with a Bachelor of Social Work, he could not, it was a while before he was hired in that position within the Black community. So you come a very, very long way, and good for you. And I'm listening to this thing. I have grandchildren in a very, very white Anglo-Saxon place north of Kingston called Harrowsmith. And I'm going to share what I've heard tonight with my daughter. They do a really good job in the history program there in grade 5 for looking at interaction between First Nations people and the explorers, and showing how there were two sides at least to that story. So maybe what you've provided, it's time to introduce that into Ontario. So there, that's all.
Actually, I'll tell you, to be honest, Graham, the kit has resonated in Ontario much more than even in Quebec. We're starting to make headroads here, like in some places, particularly QFSHA, which is wonderful. But our sales took off last year in Ontario. They did not take off the same way here. So, but only in certain sections of Ontario. So I'm not sure about that area that you're talking about. And we've actually got a new campaign which just started now to get corporations and business to buy a kit and donate it to a school. So whether it's the school they went to, an old high school or an elementary school, but you want to make a difference. You say you want to make a difference. You believe in inclusion and equity and diversity, etc. Here's an opportunity for you to put your money where your mouth is and to share this, because there's over 13,000 schools in this country. It's going to take a long time to get in every school. So we want to encourage that as much as possible.
Okay, so my email is part of how I got plugged into this tonight. So I'm just asking the organizers to provide me with the links, and I'll pass them on.
It's in the chat, Graham.
Okay.
Tammy has just put the link for the resources in the chat. So if you want to look there, or else we can send it to you also.
Okay.
And Mary, if we talk about that, then Mary asked the question, are all schools aware of the kit? And I imagine, Dorothy, you're going to say no.
Actually, I don't know about that, because I can't tell you how many KESBA conferences I've been at. And PIPT as well. I've been to Linton. Linton's gone up to Quebec City. We've been at KESBA when it's was in North, I think in Laurentians. So we have made it at least the first 3 or 4 years before the pandemic. We tried to go out and make sure that the kit became, people became comfortable. They knew what Black Biblio was. They knew what the kit was. It's just a question of, I guess, individual schools, because of course at KESBA you're talking at a certain level, right?
Yeah.
So perhaps the individual schools were not aware in different sections of the province of the kit, but we've been trying to find a way in which to get the word out. And QFSHA is a great way to start to get the words out into the local communities that this resource is there. You don't have to go to the United States or look on Google to get something to teach Black history. We have this Canadian resource. It's the only one of its kind in Canada, and it can be localized. I mean, you can use it in a way that you can tell your own stories. I think it's a great tool, a great resource, and a jumping off point to start those conversations in your classroom about justice, about equality, about racism, a whole host of other, quote, Canadian values and how that impacted people. So I think it's good. I want everybody, when you get the kit, to fall in love with it. Fall in love with 1 or 2 stories and tell those stories. We have 26 stories. I don't want you to know all 26. Some of them are boring, even to me. Oh, they're important, though. No, they're boring. But again, some stories are going to make you get really excited. Linton tells the same stories over and over and over again. Why? Because he loves those stories and they resonate with people because he's so enthusiastic when he's telling. It's like, hey, did you know we had a sprinter at the turn of the century who actually beat a horse? He was a world champion sprinter. He was so fast. He beat a horse. And everybody goes, what? And he goes, ha, ha. And he also beat a locomotive. It's true. It's a true story. So he loves that story, but there are other stories in the kit as well. You know, in politics and sports and whatever, that you as or educators will get really excited about or interested in, and that will resonate with your students. And the nice thing about it is you can tell those stories over and over every year. The kit will last you 5 or 6 years easily.
Good. I have a question from Alex Adrian. Wanted to know if you can share with them the timeline of the missing pages of history that they used as a resource at the DaCosta Hall Summer School.
Yes. I don't know if I can share with them. I can remember editing it a couple of times.
Okay.
We didn't use that. There are other stories that we used. I might have referenced it maybe using the Costa story, but the Costa is not in my kit. So no, I didn't use it, but of course I'm very much aware of it. I have
Okay.
2 versions of it here on my shelf.
Okay, thank you. And at this point, David, I would like to introduce our MNA, David Birnbaum. Please, I want you to speak on this. I know that you were a great supporter of this, and I know you're very proud of this. So please.
Thank you. Isn't that nice, Rosemary? It's a real pleasure to see so many familiar faces, and Dorothy, to hear you again on this amazing project. And my apologies to Marlene, as she will probably know, given our earlier interactions today, I was tied up in Parliamentary Commission. What a wonderful
If I can interrupt you, David, you did fantastic at the Parliamentary Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, first of all, to have Dorothy again bring this project to life is so nice to hear. I'm a teacher wannabe in my own life, and I could just imagine what a tremendous pedagogical tool this has been. And yeah, I was really proud. Linton and I go back a long way, and I've got to know Dorothy, but I was really proud to be able to find the resources to do something that I'm sure Dorothy will agree was very important, which was to provide the money and the tools to translate ABC into French. And I offer my help, discreet or otherwise, if we can track down other sources of funding to make this as accessible as possible to schools and other interested groups in the community, because it's a wonderful piece of work. Thank you for the opportunity. My best to all of you.
Oh, thank you again. Thank you again.
Nicole,
So it's my understanding that Linton is still presenting.
Oh, yes.
So I'm not
yes.
sure how so I'm wondering if maybe we can also open it up to Marlene answering some questions if anybody has questions, and then maybe we'll catch up with Linton and we can still all end sort of together.
Okay, I have a comment from Nicole Julien, who says, thank you so much for sharing this. I can't wait to share this wonderful toolkit with my school team.
Fantastic.
And
Thank
then
you. Thank
we
you.
have from Mimi, Dr. Williams, do you have a favorite Canadian Black historical figure you've discovered in researching for your kit? Can you share it?
Whoa.
We're putting you on the spot.
It for me is kind of like what I think actually the story that intrigues me the most that I would love to do some more research. 2 of them now that I'm thinking of it. But I love the story of the Bunga family, particularly George Bunga. He was a coureur de bois, a Black coureur de bois. Him and his family were, and it wasn't unusual for Blacks to be coureur de bois. I was like blown away when I found that out. I think originally the idea that, you know, I learned history here in Quebec, and no one ever said the coureur de bois were anything but the Canadien Français. So it was quite a surprise to find out not only was he a coureur de bois, but he went to school in Montreal. Okay, I can remember being so excited about that information, and I've thrown it out there on a couple of occasions to students in education. Do you know what school he went to? Can you find out what school he went to? Was it College Seminaire? I want to know. Yeah, his story just really appealed to me because he was, won't say more than a coeur de bois, but he wound up, because his mom was Ojibwe and his father was a Bunga from the Bunga family. He was brought up in the area today we know as Minnesota, which was part of New France, and that's why his mom brought him to Montreal to go to school, him and his brothers. And he became so proficient in what he did. He was a guide, a trapper. He used to bring groups of Europeans in, and he would guide them through the wilderness. His mom being Ojibwe, he knew the Algonquin languages and the dialects. And the state of Minnesota over time recognized his language skills and his diplomatic skills and his ability to work with people. They made him a, what do you call it? Not a, well, I guess for lack of a better term, a diplomat. He wrote contracts and treaties for Minnesota, and the First Nations people called him the first white man of Minnesota, because of course, race, as we know, is a social construct. So to them, he was a white man. In other words, he was not of them. It's just an amazing story. So many bits and pieces that I'm learning about Bunga, but I'm looking at the Canadian dimension of his life, so that the students, the learners in this, who use the kit can understand where he fits and his significance. I just think it's great. We don't have enough research to know what he did on the Canadian side of the story, but there's an awful lot you can learn about him by going into the Minnesota archives and their own historical information.
Thank you. I'd like to take this moment to recognize the MP from Hull Aylmer, Greg Fergus. Thank you so much for being here. We know you're the chair of the Caucus of Black Parliamentarians, and do you have a few words that you would like to say?
I'm just standing on the shoulders of Marlene Jennings, that's all. Who was Marlene? Don't say that. It's really true. She was a friend and an inspiration when she was a federal MP, and she remains an inspiration today in terms of the work that she's doing. She's really a model, I think, for everyone. Don't take no. I think that should be your nickname. just always keep going. You got the no if you do nothing. So if you work hard, you'll get to the yes. And that's very much Marlene's approach, and that's the approach which I've been able to be here. But I'm also feeling really quite intimidated, Rosemary, because I see Dorothy Williams, Dr. Williams here, who I've read her books. And so it's just like, wow, this is amazing. So Road to Now is one of my favorite books. My brother passed it on to me, actually. And okay. It was just such a page turner in terms of understanding about ourselves.
Yes, exactly. I had a couple of people tell me that they read it before it goes, it's not bedtime reading. Oh yes, it's bedtime reading. Okay.
Well, I've just been notified that Grant Myers had to leave, and he's congratulating you and Linton on your kit. And he said, sadly, George Bunga is recognized more in the U.S. than he is in Canada.
I know. But almost all the stories are the same.
Yeah.
Almost all the stories are the same. Another one that sort of parallels that is Harriet Tubman, who's my T in the kit, because most people don't realize her story, at least the part that we know of her being an Underground Railroad conductor here in North America. Her story really happens because of Canada.
Yeah.
And most people don't realize that. She took 19 trips to save, they say, anywhere from 300 to 500 people. But you know, her home was, when she was doing that, was St. Catharines, Ontario.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a Canadian story.
That I knew, yeah.
Well, yeah, you knew that. So now they've got parks named after her. The street, I mean, they're starting to embrace the fact that this great heroine, Harriet Tubman, is not just an American story. It's a Canadian story. And again, something that all Canadians from sea to sea should be proud of and should know. And I'm glad St. Catharines has finally stepped up to the plate.
That's good. Jeanette would like to know if you've, I see that Linton is back, so it means his group is in, but Jeanette would like to know that if you and Linton have been finding a lot of stories that haven't been told, are you planning on maybe doing another kit?
I'll leave that up to Linton. Linton, you can answer that one.
You can answer.
Actually, I wondered if another set of cards could be added to the kit.
You're muted, Linton. You're muted.
Okay.
There are a number of iterations that we have planned that involve thematic, kits like inventors or women or military or scientists. We're looking at sports, as another genuine category that we would like to be able to do iterations about. We are just beginning. I mean, and the wealth of information that Dr. Williams has, you cannot fathom how many stories she has, and not only in terms of the major figures that we'd like to talk about, but the side stories about what those things, the consequences that came, and how they affected other parts of Canadian history. Right? Both of the sets are available in English and in French, and we plan to continue to produce whatever we produce in both languages. And as I said before, I recognize David Birnbaum for having provided the translation funds for us with our first iteration, and we'll be looking to many others as we move along this this journey. But I can't tell you how many stories Dr. Williams has that that would actually blow your mind that you did not know, and you're wondering, and you wonder why you did not know them. And I don't know if Dr. Williams mentioned that we've been a part of the Rogers Sports and Media arm that has supported us with the All In project. They chose 5 projects from across the country, including Big Brothers and Big Sisters, the LGBTQ2 community, and I think 2 others that I can't remember at the moment. And we were one of the 5 that were selected. And not only that, we got a second year of their support. So throughout the launch of that, the second part was today. And throughout all of their media streams, radio and television, they will be mentioning Black Biblio, Black history, and the stories that we wrote, and featuring Dr. Williams. And I am so proud of her for having stuck to it this long. And finally, there's been some recognition for her and her efforts. She was just recently chosen as one of the 28 Black change makers for 2022 by the CBC. And many of you may have seen her this evening on CTV, being interviewed by one of the young people from our community, Maya Johnson. So she is finally getting the recognition that she merits and that she's worked so hard for. And I can't tell you, and as I've told many other people, she's the real deal, and I just bask in her glow. I've been lucky and privileged to be along for the ride, and those pancake breakfasts were really worth it. Over the years that I tried to convince her to try to put this material into schools. And we're hopeful that the next generation of kids coming through schools will not grow up, hearing like she heard when she was in her high school years as to why her teachers did not teach Black history. And she was told point blank, because you have no history. And we want to be able to make sure that, young Blacks growing up in this country will know that they do have a history. I know it inspired Dorothy to become a historian about Black Canadian, because she was convinced through her family and what she knew about the people in her community where she grew up in Little Burgundy, that we had contributed, and that we had been here all along and for very long. She's 5th or 6th generation here in Quebec. All right. And if that doesn't make a Quebecer, I don't know what does. But she pursued it, with dogged determination. She almost kept it to herself. And those pancake breakfasts that I had with her down at the Green Spot down in St. Henry, those Sunday mornings, trying to convince her, like I said, have been well worth it. I've been enriched by it, and all the students that we've been able to touch over the last 6 years now have been enriched by her knowledge, and we want to be able to continue to do that, because there's a wealth of information that she has about our community that all Canadians need to know, not just Black Canadians.
Thank you, Linton. Okay, Carol?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've heard you say before, and I don't know if it's still the case, that there's no program of Black studies in universities in Canada. Maybe that's changed. Is there something starting to happen?
Change. It is starting to change, Carol. I've seen in the last 2 to 3 years it's changing in Ontario. There might be some inkling of it here in Montreal and in Concordia, but Ontario seems to be going full steam ahead now with that, and Nova Scotia as well, but it's still quite limited. It's going to take some time for it to go across the country. When I was doing my master's and ready to jump into a doctorate, I was told there was no point. I would never get a job teaching Black Canadian history. So, and that was in 99. So that's not that far back, right? That was in 99. So really, that's only, it's only about 22, 23 years ago. So, some change is starting to happen.
Well, that's good. Okay. I've heard from Maria. As a homeschooler and member of the AQED, the Quebec Association of Homeschoolers, this kit is a huge wealth of resources in teaching our kids about diversity and inclusion. In fact, this is what is in our homeschooling unit all this month in learning about Black history, diversity, and inclusion. I wonder if this kit can also be made available for homeschoolers through the AQED.
Carol can speak to that because I think it's already there. Oh, I don't know.
We don't, at home and school, we don't deal with homeschoolers usually. But,
no.
Sandra, are you planning on answering that question, or are you saying good night?
Okay. I'm saying good night. I have to go. Okay, thank you. It was great.
No problem. Dr. Finn, I know the school boards do have homeschoolers. Is there a way that we can help them get this kit or let them know about it?
I don't know to what extent. I know there's some work that's done with homeschooling students at the end of the year, but I don't know about the frequency of contact during the year. We don't typically have a whole lot of, and actually someone in a private chat was asking me about the kit in our school board. So that's just something I need to research to find out more and see if we even have it available.
Okay.
Libraries would be an area that it would make it a little bit more accessible.
Okay.
I missed what you said.
I'm sorry, talk to Tom Rhymes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he actually bought 2 kits.
Okay.
A while back. So he would know probably where they are in your system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll invest in a few more.
Okay, because I know our home and schools that are in the Lester B. Pearson School Board, some of them have also been looking at purchasing kits for the school. Okay. Brian?
Yeah, I'd like to acknowledge the support of Mr. Greg Fergus, the MP for Hull Elmer. His intervention with Canadian Heritage in support of this project, I'm convinced allowed us to get funding, because we originally planned to have a in-person session tonight at Pierrefonds Community High School Community Learning Center, and next Thursday at the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Elementary School Community Learning Center in Hull, Gatineau, which is part of his riding. And we converted to an alternate virtual plan, and we only received confirmation of the funding last Thursday. So thank you, Mr. Greg Fergus. We really appreciated the support, and I know that he really wants the kits in all the schools in the riding of Hull Elmer, and we're hoping to be able to accomplish that.
Thank you, Brian. Marlene?
Yeah, before I leave you, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me to be with Dr. Dorothy Williams, who I admire. And we go back many, many years. She's one of my heroes. And I wanted to say, Dorothy, I'm not sure, I don't know if you're aware that McGill University has adopted an action plan to address anti-Black racism. And I am convinced that your work on bringing to light the contributions and the reality of Canada's diversity, particularly with regards to Black Canadians, all the way back to 1608, went a long way in having a university like McGill suddenly open to actually listen, to acknowledge Black racism, to acknowledge its own history of Black racism, and to establish, and the reason why I know this is because I studied at McGill. So I get notices that they send out. And I just got their January 2022 notice called Remembering, Reckoning, and Reconciling. And it's about the work it needs to do, initiatives on its relationship with the Indigenous people, but also with Black people. And they've got 2 research positions, Provotio, I don't know how they call it, research fellow, research scholar, Melissa Shaw plans, and she's a assistant professor, just been hired on tenure track in the Department of History and Classical Studies. She will be teaching 2 classes on Black Canadian history. And they quote her, Black Canadian history is not a subset of Canadian history. It's a field in itself. I don't think, and she's a young woman, I don't think that she would be where she was now if it wasn't for the foundational work that you've done over the last 30 and 40 years. So thank you. I have to say goodbye now, but thank you, Brian, for thinking of inviting me. I've learned more than I think I would have been here just as a participant. So goodbye, everyone, and congratulations.
Bye.
Thank you, Marlene. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Renata?
Just a fantastic curriculum development, Dorothy, that you have done for the study of history, social studies at all levels, including the marketing of the program with Linton in the schools. It seems to me that the resource material is really being used by various groups and being promoted, but I'm wondering, the development of curriculum in this province is so centralized at the Ministry of Education. What has been the response? Have you had any? To me, if diversity is an important part of the educational process in all our schools, it would seem to me that the ministry should thank you for the development of such a program. And it wouldn't hopefully take, years as it usually does for these programs to be approved through projects, et cetera, et cetera. Where are we at in terms of a response from the Ministry of Education in making that an important part of the school curriculum at every level?
Well, I'm afraid I'll probably be 6 feet under before that happens. The ministry has been in possession of a kit. We have inquired on a number of occasions, where it's at. They seem to not know where it is, even though we handed it, directly to people who were responsible for the dossier. And but as you know, the history curriculum has been a challenge on many levels in this province for many years.
Yeah.
And certainly the latest, iteration of the history curriculum, leads us to believe that we're getting further and further away from the idea of inclusion and recognition of diversity. And not only in terms of our community, the English-speaking community, and the Indigenous community, as well, and many others, and many other minority, communities. So we're hopeful, yes, but at some point in time, you have to face reality, and we will continue to work the way that we're working, school by school, school board by school board, working to make sure that this gets in the hands and gets in of teachers who can put it in the hands of the students that they work with on a daily basis. And hopefully at some point in time, there will be some collective recognition that this kind of material, not necessarily ours, but this kind of material, all right, needs to be present in any history curriculum, because as we've entitled our program with Rogers Sports and Media, you think you know Canada's story? Well, think again. And we're telling you about the untold story of Canada, and that's exactly what it is. It's Canadian history, not just Black history.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Linton. Also, Rachel, you had a question?
Yeah, hi. I had a question. I was just curious to know what has been happening in terms of the CSDM of the School Board of Montreal, the French School Board of Montreal, and if anyone knows of schools that are using it there or who have been approached yet. My kids are students there, and I mean, I'm going to take it to my school I work at a private school, but I'm just wondering if anybody's already sort of on the move with the CSDM in Montreal.
No, we don't have anybody. We have a great salesperson out in Ontario that's made great inroads. We don't have anybody doing the equivalent here in Quebec. It's been a hard slog, very difficult to get the message out. We made a point of ensuring every product we had was also offered in French, but it has not moved yet at the same level that it has in English. So it's a real challenge, and there doesn't seem to be any takers for that. So
okay,
it's quite difficult.
I have from Pascal, who's thanking you very much for tonight and for the kit. I teach at NDG Elementary School with the CSSDM, and we'll definitely talk about this with my principal and colleagues this week.
Oh, okay.
So you've got one school on board with you. There you go.
Okay.
Okay. Brian?
Well, that, you know, our website is totally bilingual, so you can go in and click change the language and everything. You can walk through the whole process in French. So that's,
There you go, Pascal. Great. And then I have Debbie Zemnikis, I'm sorry, Debbie. She's at Maple Grove Elementary, and they've purchased the cards for all the teachers last year.
Yes, they did.
So just wanted to let you know that. Brian?